thank you, Benjamin, Sheena, and Deborah, for making the time. I would like to tell you that every year, whenever Media Rumble happens, we always have one session on revenue models and the changing revenue models, predominantly reader-supported, whether you call it subscription or membership. And every year, the audience must be sick of having me host it. But I have selfish reasons because there's much I want to learn. Newslaundry started off with a mission in 2012 that we will not have any ads, and we've stuck to that. And we've learned from experts such as you, so I hope to do that in this session too. So thank you all. So Benjamin, Dr. Toff, what would you prefer? Since you
Benjamin's fine.
Benjamin, other than your introduction that my friend and colleague gave, Suraj, you also are actually one of the people behind a recent study, which I actually have read some of. So I'd like to kick off on that. I'd like to encourage all our listeners and viewers. There's a Reuters Institute and University of Oxford study. It's listening to what trust in news means to users. It's a qualitative evidence from 4 countries. And a team which Benjamin has been a part of, and I'm guessing led, has come up with this 50-page report. Now, just give us the main findings. Of course, I would encourage everyone to read the full report. I'm sure there'll be lots of insights into it. But what have you found from your research? And is there huge differences in different countries and audiences to how they react to news?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so that report is part of a larger project, actually, which we call the Trust in News Project. And we are looking at attitudes towards news organizations and journalism more generally across India, the US, the UK, and Brazil. And one of the reasons we're trying to do that is to often trust in news has been studied in particular markets, many times the US. And so trying to get a broader sense of how the media environment, the political environment, how these different factors play in. So that particular report, one of the main takeaways had to do with, one of the things we found when we talked to people one-on-one about the way that they think about trust, rather than the way that we as researchers or journalists and practitioners tend to think about it, it's somewhat distinct from the kind of focus on journalism practices as being sort of the most important thing that people are weighing in their minds when they're differentiating between sources. And rather, they're looking at more sort of obvious, observable things about a news organization, like, both how familiar it is or how used to it is, whether they grew up with the brand, and that sense of familiarity, which has a really important role to play, as well as, and this was actually particularly the case in India, its appearance, and so sort of how professional it looks, how put together it looks, those kinds of things, which, if you think about the way that people are coming across news increasingly these days online, it could be, a matter of a fraction of a second in their social media feeds. They don't have as much information to go off of when deciding what news to trust. And so, the big takeaway, I think, from that report, and we've since done some survey research as well in all 4 countries, which have also pointed us in this direction, that, people need they work with heuristics to sort of shortcuts to make sense of what they're encountering, and there's a significant portion of the public for whom they don't have a lot of information about the sources that they're engaging with, and so they have a really hard time actually differentiating between, why should I trust this news brand versus another one. And so trying to find ways in which individual brands, individual organizations can really stand out from one another and communicate in that kind of environment, I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
So there were no significant differences from your findings from country to country, like India was similar to Brazil and other markets. That's one question. The second one being, explain the kind of paradox between a dissatisfaction with news and a distrust in news in general, yet your findings found that a large majority trusted legacy brands, something that they were familiar with growing up with. So that kind of, is in conflict with each other. How did your research team figure this out?
So on the first question, there were some significant differences. And in that particular report, we focused more on the similarities because they were pretty striking across the four countries, despite very different media environments. Some of the differences are a little easier to make sense of in the survey work that we've done. So we just published earlier this month a second report that details those survey-based findings. And we do find there, in India, the level of trust is significantly higher than in the US and UK and Brazil. Actually, 38% of respondents in India said that they completely trusted the information in the news, which is the most extreme category, which was a much larger percentage than in other countries. In India as well, the largest we saw the largest percentage of respondents who said they trusted all 15 different individual news brands that we asked about, which was also much higher. And we saw that people in India said they trusted news on Google more than any individual brand that we asked about in the country. And the percent who did not trust news on WhatsApp was also higher than any individual brand. So there's a lot of polarization in terms of the way that people think about the sources they're encountering. And that's one of the things we try to do in that report is separate out, not just thinking about low and high trust, but the people who are sort of selectively trusting of sources and the way that they go about making those decisions from the people who are sort of more generally untrusting. And we really find that, a lot of those people who are untrusting, and this is true across all four countries, they tend to be more indifferent towards news. They have less experience conversing or knowing journalists. They know less about the way journalism works, and they're less interested in news. And that group, I think is both harder to reach for news organizations because they sort of more generally are less interested. But they're also different from that kind of vocal set of critics who are very critical of the news, but who actually have often specific brands of news that they do trust. And so that's, I think, that gets into that paradox where we tend to think about there being a lot of distrust in news, but distrust is somewhat different from a lack of trust, which we think is more about a lack of familiarity, a lack of experience getting to know an organization.
Thanks, Benjamin. So, Deborah, I mean, one thing that always surprises me is that data findings often go against your conventional understanding of a market. For example, it seems that Indians are less distrustful of the news than the contemporaries in the West. Yet, convention says that it's more difficult to get Indians to pay for news, even the ones who can afford it. So, what has your experience been in Malaysia? And I will just also introduce you as the member. You're the member engagement coordinator for Naratif. I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is a news portal, which actually I have open in front of me right now. And your support page has, a plan for, institutional membership. You have gift subscription, you have sponsor memberships, and you have a donate basket separately. Like you can also donate. So what have your experiences been with getting people to pay for news? Because yours is like Newslaundry is also ad free. And how much do you rely on data? Because Newslaundry, we've always relied on instinct and we've kind of blumbered along. But as we become bigger, I think you will have to rely more and more on data. Because when you're like 10 people strong, you can just go on instinct, and then 20, 30, 40. Then what has that been for you? Data, instinct, experience in Malaysia, more distrustful, less? How hard is it to get those people to pay?
Absolutely. So New Naratif is actually a regional outlet. So we are not based we do have a KL office, but in Malaysia, but we publish news from around Southeast Asia. So we have members from Singapore, Malaysia, the US, UK, and, we take our members are from all across the world, basically. And we actually, three of our founders were from Singapore. So initially, a lot of our membership was Singaporean, and that's still true. And we're trying to diversify out of that. And we've seen an increasing number of Malaysians sign up this year in particular. I think Southeast Asia is maybe a more challenging market to get people to pay for news, especially outside of Singapore. Singaporeans have a relatively good purchasing power, but, and then following from Singapore, Malaysia, but then, it becomes more challenging to get people to sign up in Indonesia and Thailand, Cambodia, and I don't think we have any members in Laos. So yeah, when purchasing power it becomes more limited, then it gets harder to get people to pay for news, especially at the tier of news that we are offering membership, which is the lowest tier is $52 a year or $1 a week, but that is very expensive in some countries in Southeast Asia. And to answer your question, I think that's related to data. I think similarly, we at New Naratif were kind of going off of instinct a lot of the time. And then last year, I'm the membership engagement manager. And so I got some training from an audience research consultant. And that's really been very valuable for me and for the organization as a whole in understanding our audience more. And it's really helped us to grow. So surveying your audience is, if I have any piece of advice to anybody starting out a media company anywhere in the world, it's to really talk to your audience. Do a lot of audience research and don't make decisions until you have some data from your audience. So I regularly do audience research. I did some at the beginning of the year in April, and I did that right before we launched a membership drive in May. And that was very invaluable. So we have a few different tiers of membership. We have 52, which is the lowest, 102, 302, and then the most expensive tier is 552. And we don't offer more perks at the higher tiers of membership. So all members get the same privileges at all the tiers. It doesn't matter if you're paying 52 or 552, you get the same product. And that was like an equity thing for us. So obviously, if you've tried to sell anything online, people would generally pay for the lowest, costing product. So most people were signed up at $52 a year. But when I talked to our audience earlier this year, and I said, what would make you sign up at a higher tier? Or what do you think would make people sign up at the higher tiers? And a few people said, I think if you told me that signing up at $102 would create more access to New Naratif to people who couldn't afford it, then I would do that. And some people said, like, if I signed up at $302 a year, that would mean that more people could come on staff full time. I would do that. So they wanted to know that their higher buy-in to the organization would mean tangibly that more people got access to our content, or that more team members could be paid more equitably. So that's a reflection of the kind of audience we have, which is more altruistic. And so that's what we said. I mean, if you sign up at 102, you create access for one other person. When you sign up for 302, you create access for 5 people, and on and on. And that was a very, very successful membership drive for us. We saw people on average signing up at $80. We had more memberships at 102 and 302. All our higher tiers grew by about 50% this year because of this push that the higher that you sign up, the more access you're creating for people who can't afford one. And we've also introduced, as you pointed out, sponsored membership. So that is where you can purchase a membership for somebody who can't afford one. So anybody who can't afford a New Naratif membership can write into us, and we'll send them a form and they fill it out, and they can have a membership that somebody else has purchased so that they can have access.
And is that fairly successful, that plan of yours?
Yeah, I mean, it has been. I think in the last week or so, we've had, I believe it's about 7 people, 7 sponsored memberships have been created. And that's kind of related to, earlier you made a joke about, how I was trained as a fiction writer, and I could keep making money if I in news if I stuck to fiction writing. And I joked back. I said, well, that's what the Singapore government thinks, and that's because The Singapore government has not been very friendly to New Naratif. We've run afoul of their prevention of false acts and online falsehoods and manipulation act a few times. And they've just tabled a new foreign interference countermeasures bill, which we are potentially going to be affected by. And I think, as a response to the tabling of this bill, we've had an influx of people buying sponsored memberships. So yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen a lot of success with the sponsored membership. We've seen a huge success in people buying at higher tiers.
So clearly, in your case, and that similar Newslaundry, the appeal is more to the spirit of journalism can only remain alive if you pay for it. So you pay for others as well, which is what we do. Whereas, I mean, in India, there products like the Ken and the Morning Context, which have a large fintech private equity audience, which do like in-depth stories, which are in the fintech tech space. And that, I guess, is more they're paying for the product rather than for the spirit of paying for others. Now, one of the workshops that I attended, which was, experts from around the world, some of the best, the learning that they gave me was that it's easier to get someone who's come at tier 1 to get him to pay more, or her. So if someone's coming for 1,000 rupees and you have a higher tier, it's much easier to get someone who's already in your subscription or membership model to pay more, rather than get more people to pay. Now, the data around the world suggests that's true, but I just thought that was a bit unfair that you just keep milking the one person who was nice enough to pay you 10 and then take 20 and get 30. Do you, but that is what data tells us. Do you actually follow that advice which, is given to you, or do you try to get more and more people convinced that you should pay no matter how little?
I think we definitely know, so that, I mean, it's a numbers game. We definitely need to have more members, and we have a number of like how many members we need to be 100% member funded. We're not there yet. We're about 30% member funded, which is which, for those who don't know, that's doing quite well for the industry standard. There are outliers who have 80%. I don't think there's anybody, and maybe the other panelists can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's anybody who's 100% member funded, or if there is, it's very, very rare. 30% is about like the standard for what's doing well. So we know that we need more members, but you're right in that we did see when we introduced this concept that paying at a higher tier is will allow access to more people. We did see people convert from 52 to 102, and sometimes even the highest level. We had one member go from 52 to 552. So it definitely works. But as I said, we were seeing new members sign up at 102 and sometimes even 302. So for our particular audience who have this kind of value of altruism, this pitch that you can create access to our content was very compelling.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Now, Sheena, just one thing, Deborah. Newslaundry makes all its money. I mean, although we do have events such as this, but as of this year, we have had month on month, all our costs can be taken care of by subscriptions. But then again, we started 10 years ago. It's taken 10 years to get to this point. It hasn't been 2 years. But, Sheena, we had on Media Rumble 4 years ago, the founder of Der Correspondent, Rob. I don't know whether you've met him or, I've been able to chat with him. So Rob Winberg, I think is how he pronounces his surname. So at the Media Rumble, he had said that, they raised $1 million. I think there were a bunch of journalists and they started and they were profitable from day one. Sustainability wasn't a problem. In fact, the US version of Der Correspondent, Trevor Noah was one of the people who funded it and they tried it there. It wasn't so successful. And when he was here, he was asked questions like, what was your target audience? What is your strategy? He was like, there was no target audience. There was no strategy. We were a bunch of journalists. We said, we need money to do journalism. People gave it. So the American journalist said, easy to do in Norway, not so easy to do in the US, and definitely not in India. So this behavior of reader support, Google has all the data in the world. You are the modern age gods. So give us some wisdom so that we can be sustainable, and tomorrow maybe snatch some of the audience from you. How does that audience behavior change in different parts? What does your data tell you?
First of all, hi everyone. Super interesting already to hear what Benjamin and Deborah had to say. Look, by no means are we either digital gods or are we claiming to know how reader revenue works or how it's evolving. But to your point, we are working actively within the news ecosystem, both through our research as well. By no means is it as exhaustive as the Reuters Institute, but we every year also work closely with online readers to identify what are some of the trends that are defining reader revenue. In addition to that, we've been launching subscription labs across the globe in LATAM and North America to truly understand what is the maturity scale for reader revenue looks like, and how can different tactics support reader revenue for news organizations. And the way we're thinking about it is sort of stepping away. We've talked about trust as a signal to identify how much users are going to pay for. You've spoken essentially about the value that the journalist as a brand brings to the organization, and then users are deeply connected to the journalist, therefore they're ready to donate. And then Deborah has highlighted how building sort of a community around what the organization stands for, building a membership model, and communicating to the audience and its understanding of what the value proposition the brand drives can also drive revenue. So I think how we're thinking about is like really encouraging both new businesses or new news organizations launching subscription versus also legacy businesses converting into digital subscription, is to kind of think about subscriptions in three different ways. One is looking at the macro level and sort of identifying within your country, what are some of the trends that are identifying the subscription economy? What is the internet penetration? What is the GDP look like? How are payment gateways available? Are there actually credit cards available to pay or not? Because this finally identifies like how do you make that seamless experience possible on your website. The second is kind of looking at micro trends. So the competitive landscape, the willingness to pay, and therein trust becomes a very significant part of like, do users trust news or not, and are they willing to pay? And some of the trends that we're seeing is really interesting. I'll illustrate it with one example in Asia Pacific. If you look at digital penetration, markets like Japan, markets like Australia are more likely are digitally savvy, and therefore you expect more digital subscriptions to be present in the market. That's untrue. Actually, you're seeing markets like India and Indonesia where trust, as I think Benjamin also alluded to it, is higher, and therefore the user's willingness to pay is actually higher. Other than you said, it's really hard I think it is a belief that Indian users, it's really hard to get them to pay. But so the research we did this year, for online users in India, both willingness to pay is really high in India and Indonesia compared to some of the other Asia markets. And 1 out of 5 readers in India have subscribed to digital subscriptions. And so you're looking at almost 21% of our total pool in India has subscribed, and 21% are looking to subscribe. And I think that's probably also because of the pandemic and users looking for more reliable information. And so they're looking at legacy newspapers and subscribing to them to get more trusted information.
Sorry to cut in, Sheena, you can continue. You said 21% who've subscribed to news or to any content. Like, does that include Netflix, etc., or just news?
Just news. So they put paid news sources in India, and 27% are planning to subscribe. So that's a large pool within the online readership that's looking to subscribe. And I think that's also because, of the brands that are existing that are digitally native, whether you look at a Ken or a Quint or the print or Newslaundry for that matter. I think the data suggests otherwise, that news readers are becoming more and more cognizant of the kind of news names they affiliate with, and therefore also ready to pay. And I think that's where the last part of like the framework that we encourage news organizations to think about is their brand. What does their brand stand for? Are they doing audience research? Of course, considering macro and micro trends are really important, but are they really identifying what does their mission statement? And like you said, like Newslaundry stands for ad-free experience. The Ken stands to deliver value to business audiences or audiences that are looking for business news. The SCMP wants to be the voice of Asia and the voice of China to the world. As and when you identify those mission statements, are you delivering that to your subscribers in a seamless fashion? Are you actually continuing to reiterate that mission statement and then build a subscription model on top of it? Of course, a lot of audience research goes into it, a lot of surveys, focus groups, and constantly asking, what would you be ready to pay for is critical. And I think we're really encouraging organizations to think more broadly about subscriptions than going to the last mile tactic and thinking about. And one more thing, I think we talked a little bit about our asking already subscribed users to pay for to pay more. I think we ran a subscription lab with 8 partners in Asia Pacific, and that's kind of the recommendation we made to them as well, that you need to not just think about the already converted users, therefore they're in the pool, but actually think about how you can increase the value-added benefits, whether it's access to events, whether you're giving personalized newsletters, and therefore think about how can you increase not just give them offers, but also increase the pricing. And that can be done by creating a value-added members benefit program. You can also think about creating more recurring payments, instead of like giving offers that are just 3 months or 6 months, you can think about 24 months offers. And that's also really working for, say, a partner like Quint. The moment they changed their subscription offering to just from 6 months to about 12 months, they saw a significant increase in the total value or a lifetime value or the ARPU that the user could drive. And therefore, it's easier to then also forecast for sustainability. So I think we're seeing a lot of tactics, but once again, it is dependent on how clear you are about who your audience is, what your brand stands for, and are you employing all the tactics that you can through your website, through your newsletters, and through your membership program to deliver to that value for your audiences.
Right. So before I go back to Benjamin, one is you said that 21 or 27% people are still looking to subscribe to news they haven't yet. So what do we have to do to get that database from you? Is to have to hack into the Google system? Do you have their phone numbers, email IDs? How do I get these people's names and numbers and email IDs? Is there a bidding process? Oh, no chance. Okay, just kidding. But I will say our strategy, at least mine, has been since we started, I shame my audience. I use the Hindi word mufat khor, which means freeloaders, that all of you listening to our content, because some of our content is behind the wall, most is not. So I said all of you who are able to afford it and are earning well and are buying a packet of cigarettes a day or buying a drink in the evening, a fraction of your bad habits can fund news to make democracy healthier, and apparently shaming people works. So that's a strategy I deploy, just to let you know. So Benjamin,
I was just going to ask you, carrot or stick. So either one.
I just use shame. That you can pay for alcohol and cigarettes, but not for news. Shame on you. So I'm going to start questions in 10 minutes. But Benjamin, you've heard the Google, the big picture, someone who's running a website with a fair amount of success. What tips would you have for me and others like me and Deborah from the kind of consumer behavior that you've seen? Because while you put this report together, I'm sure you learned so much more that hasn't made it to the report, and that kind of advice and insights to audience would be invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening to both Deborah and Sheena, one of the things I was thinking about was how both the importance of communicating sort of what your brand is about, what that identity that makes you distinct from your various competitors in the very, very vast marketplace of news organizations that users might be encountering. But not just in terms of like making sure you have a very clear and coherent mission statement, but communicating that in every opportunity you have to be in front of those users. So, and sometimes that can be really tough because, I think there's often a tendency for news organizations to want to get, in front of as many people as possible to reach a wider audience. But sometimes the things that reach wider audiences don't necessarily reflect well on that brand identity. So there's a lot of viral content that maybe not actually be core to what your news organization does. And for many users, if that's what they're seeing when they're coming in contact with you, that's often the way that they're going to then develop a sense of what that mission statement and what that organization is about. And so there's often, I think, a real disconnect or challenge that news organizations face in they may have some idea of, what they believe in, what sets them apart from other organizations, what that value proposition is, but communicating that in a way where people may only be seeing you for very fleeting moments, or links being shared between people, or in their feeds, and how people are going to then form assumptions about what your brand is tricky. And so it's easier to get those people who are super engaged, who are actually clicking through and reading your content and maybe getting more familiar with it. Which I think makes a lot of sense then why you could sort of focus on, trying to convert those people into paying even more. But to reach a wider audience, I think you have to be somewhat creative about how you build not just, awareness of who your brand is, but a real sense of your identity and how it's distinct from others.
Right. Thanks, Benjamin. And I would highly recommend everybody read that report. I've read some, and I'm sure there's way more learning than that I can do once I've read the whole thing. Deborah, when you actually went on this mission, and clearly you're positioning it as why paying for news is important, and it's an ad-free platform, and like you've said that policy also impacts how well it does and how well it doesn't. What are the kind of benefits that you're seeing from, like you said, you really speak with your audience to make any policy or strategy shift. You don't do it on instinct anymore because that's very valuable. Can you give us an idea of what's the kind of feedback you get? Why do people pay? What prompts them to pay? And have you tried anything like we have, that if you can get 4 more subscribers to pay, like a Ponzi scheme, which is good at heart, that get 4 more people to pay for news and then we'll give you 1 month free. Have you tried that? Are people who value the importance of news good brand ambassadors? Are they effective? Are they committed? Have you tried anything along those lines?
We definitely, so last year we did a member campaign. We had, individual members talk about why they supported us, and it was like a variety of things. We find that our members and supporters support us because of our values. We have a manifesto on our website, and we really prioritize transparency. So you can read our financial reports on the website, and you can, we have open meetings where members can come and ask us any question they like. I send a newsletter out every Thursday, and I always regularly say, if you have feedback, please, you can reply to this email and we'll get it. So members really prize that. They really like that we are transparent, that we have a political point of view, which we don't try to hide. We say that, these are our values. We are for human rights. So that's our bias, but we'll always use evidence to back up our articles and our content. So, we're not shy about revealing who is funding us, how we're funded. And that, I think, is the biggest draw for a lot of people, and feedback that comes up regularly, that people really like the amount of transparency that we have. And when we fundraise, we clearly indicate where the money is going to, like this much is going to staff salary, this much is going to contributor fees, this much is going towards, website hosting, whatever it is. So people really like that kind of transparency from us. And that's one of the things that comes up very regularly when I do audience feedback. And Another thing, again, we were founded in Singapore, but we're not a Singaporean news organization. We do publish news out of Singapore. In Singapore, there isn't a lot of space for alternative views outside of the government-linked news outlets. So, people are actually very hungry in Singapore for alternative viewpoints, and we provide one. So, and we give space to like opposition politicians and that kind of thing. So, I mean, in Singapore, we occupy a kind of a niche area, though. As I mentioned, there are a few laws in Singapore that are not very media friendly, and they're encroaching on our ability to get more members, I think, in Singapore. So yeah.
I know my sister lives in Singapore for the last 20 years, and her bag was stolen one day. She made it to the front page. So I was like, really, that's what makes the front page. So, but Sheena, I saw Pew Research a few years ago, and I'll start taking questions. Aditi, Asawari, Ashutosh, I see your questions. I'll quickly go to Sheena. Sheena, if you could just keep this brief so we can take more audience questions. I read a Pew Research a couple of years ago, which spoke about, this was at the peak, Trump, when media was really polarized, which kind of showed that people who identified as liberal tended to have a wider access of news consumption than conservative, who had a narrower access of news consumption. And the tendency of people who identify themselves as liberal to pay for news was more than people who identify themselves as conservative. Now, and this is a question we get asked a lot, that since you are positioning subscriber-driven news as less compromised because you aren't depending on large corporations and clickbaits and stuff, is there not an inevitability to cater to an audience who will pay? Does your data have anything on this? Is there kind of an overlap? And Benjamin, if you want to comment on this, feel free to. Once Sheena's done, that political ideology and likelihood to pay for news, is there any correlation, causation, anything?
I think Benjamin's definitely more qualified to talk about it, both through his paper and trust, and like how does politics play a role in what you pay for or not. But some of the signals that we're seeing that users who are already paying for news want from news organizations is that more than sort of political affiliations, they actually want more factual, centered, reliable news. Number two, they want like specialized and niche content. And thirdly, they want to feel like the content is exclusive, which is very similar to any kind of subscription platform besides the news industry as well. On the opposite spectrum, folks who are considering to pay and why they don't pay for news are folks who believe that there's too much fake news or false information and politically driven information available, even in markets like Japan, which is one of the reasons they don't pay for news. And they are also very much looking for accurate and reliable information, but they don't pay for news because they believe that the content is too politicized. So I don't know if it necessarily directly answers the question that you've asked, but I think those are some of the top reasons that we're seeing across Asia Pacific on users either paying for news or wanting to pay for news.
Mostly from our most recent report, which used survey data, so we have a better sense of sort of representative samples in each country, and it is something we find in all 4 countries that we look at, that there is quite a bit of polarization along partisan or political lines. The U.S. is particularly extreme, much more so than either of the other 3 countries. But in India as well, we do find it's particularly pronounced in terms of whether people have favorable attitudes towards Modi. 80% of people who are in the generally trusting category towards news, so they trust above average number of the 15 brands that we asked about, have favorable attitudes towards Modi, whereas it's only about 50% of people in that generally untrusting category have favorable attitudes towards Modi. And so, so basically, you are seeing this tendency for people to divide along political lines in India, and we see that in Brazil and the UK as well.
All right, thanks, Benjamin. Now, I'll just read the question out. Whoever wants to take it, just say, I'll take that one. Whoever's best qualified or thinks they have an answer for that could benefit our audience or provide some value. Aditi says, is there a comprehensive methodology built around actual user research? Okay. In a subscription model, wouldn't it be vital to ensure that the value proposition of the said subscription is clearly articulated to the potential user apart from the obvious ones? Benjamin, you want to take that?
I mean, I think, yeah. So, we have the benefit of being an independent research institution. And so it has the benefit in the sense that we can look broadly at this in the methods that we're using, or trying to get, representative samples through surveys, or looking across audiences in a more general way. I think a lot of news organizations, they're often focused on the audience data that they have access to, which has to do with their own subscribers or their own members, and have a harder time getting access to all the people that they're not reaching. And I think there's some danger there in terms of the thinking about the rigor of the methods. If you're making assumptions about the people that you're not reaching without reaching those people to question them, interview them, and understand their perspective, which may be very different from the people who are actually already paying, already subscribing to you.
All right. Sheena, Deborah, you want to comment on that before I move to the next questions? You want to add anything to that?
Sure.
I think sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
I don't know about comprehensive methodology. I think it'll depend on your team and your resources. The way we do it is that we put out a call to do video calls with people. We try to do at least 10 video calls with people when we do audience research. And, we go in with this particular objective. So earlier this year was what would get people to sign up at a higher tier. And then based on those video calls, we create a survey where we give people options, and we release that to a wider segment of our audience. And that's basically it. That's how we do audience research. And that alone is quite, time intensive, and that's, about what we can do every quarter. So that's how we do it.
Yeah, Deborah?
Sorry, just quickly, I think we have actually a very extensive reader revenue playbook that we've written as part of the digital growth program. I can share the link with the team, and you can share it with the audience after. But the two ways that we're encouraging a lot of this user research to happen is, as Deborah's alluded to, looking at your core audience and doing surveys and focus groups. But one of the other ways that you can also understand audience behaviors, and specifically on how they're performing on your website, is through News Consumer Insights. It's a free tool, so if you have Google Analytics, you can use this tool anytime, and it's a visualization tool that will help you understand where are your, or how can you segment your audience from their recency, frequency, and page views. So you can look at casual versus brand lovers and fanatics who are coming more than 15 times on your site, to casual users who are coming less than one time over the past 30 days, and then see what are some of the behaviors that they are representing, from time spent on site to how much page views they're driving. And that can be a data-informed way to contribute or supplement to your audience focus group research. So I think these are tools that are readily available to also use anytime for any publication that's interested.
All right, thanks, Sheena. Now, Asavri says, with the shift of news to digital, how do digital platforms compete for a chunk with legacy media moving to digital platforms as well? So, Deborah, I guess since you've been actively doing that, before New Naratif, did you hold this position of engagement, membership engagement with any other news organization, or you?
No, I came into this role without any prior experience, and I felt for a long time like I was just figuring out what to do, and really my job in the media landscape is about 3 years old, which is how long I've had it. So back in 2018 is about when people started talking about the need for membership engagement, and having that role in a media organization. Sorry, what was the question again?
How do they compete with legacy media? I mean, right. I can just give you a bit from, Maria Ressa from the Philippines.
Yes.
So Maria has been on the Media Rumble, I think 2018, she was there at the Media Rumble, and I had a fantastic conversation with her after the session. And she said for Apple, it was relatively easy because legacy media was not doing their job. So her growth was spectacular and organic. But that was like 5-6 years ago. I'm sure today there are too many people in that space. What are you doing to compete with legacy, and what are the advantages of not being legacy, and what are the disadvantages?
Well, we are doing, New Narrative does long form in Southeast Asia, which is, not many local newsrooms in Southeast Asia do long form. So that is already one way in which we are setting ourselves apart. And most international media also don't cover Southeast Asia in long form. And another advantage we have is that our contributors are, we are against parachute journalism, basically. And then we really emphasize that our contributors, if they're not Southeast Asian, they've been based in the region for a long time. So we really don't ever try and send a correspondent into a place they've never been to for a few weeks or a month or whatever and report. So I think those are a couple of ways. We try and bring as much local nuance, and we really do report, I would say, very locally specific stories from Southeast Asia. So, we get stories from outside the capital cities of the different countries where we have media, we publish stories from. So yeah, I would say that's a main difference. And Southeast Asia is a great place for doing that kind of reporting, because not a lot of people are doing it.
Sheena, Benjamin, you have anything to add to that?
I'll just quickly add two things. I think when you're starting on the journey of launching digital subscriptions, I think it's a little bit of a blank slate both for legacy organizations as well as digital natives, because you have to start right at the drawing board and say, okay, what is your audience, which communities you serve? The advantage that digital natives have, I think, is just the fact that they're a lot more nimbler as an organization, so it's faster to move. You don't have to go through a lot of the permission and hierarchy. And I think secondly, I think with digital natives as well, you have more defined communities and value propositions. So you'll see a lot more clearer sort of what audiences they're serving and what communities they're serving, as Deborah has alluded to as well. So I think I don't necessarily who's better, but I think there are certain advantages of being digitally native and smaller in your scale to be able to keep up with the trends.
Thanks, Sheena. There's one more question, but Ashutosh, you asked, is it really not possible to report and bring news without interference on ad-driven model? Is this a recent phenomenon? It's always been there. Ashutosh, I've done a 1-hour conversation with Avlok Langer on Scoop Whoop Unscripted on this. We've really gone deep into it. So could I please request you to check that out? It's on Scoop Whoop Unscripted with Avlok Langer and me. There's a conversation, and we've really discussed this in depth. And I'm out of time. So thank you so much, Benjamin, Sheena, Deborah. This has been, as usual, a learning for me. And I shall go through the entire report, and I will just tell our audience again. It's a Reuters Institute politics it's on their website, listening to what trust in news means to users, qualitative evidence from 4 countries. And to our audience, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the Media Rumble. And I just have one more message, which I always give when I get a chance and I have a captive audience. When the public pays, the public is served. When advertisers pay, advertisers are served. So if you are dissatisfied with the news, you can do 2 things. You can whine about it on social media in the comment section of this, or you could go to the news platform of your choice who you trust and pay yourself. One of those methods will actually have a positive impact. If you're smart enough to know which one that is, you will know what to do. With that note, I again thank our audience and our wonderful panelists.